Paul Niland, gentleman, businessman, journalist, founder of Lifeline Ukraine. It is great to have you back with us, Paul. Hello.
It's always a pleasure to be with you, and I look forward to getting into the questions.
First question. Let's talk about nukes, shall we? Zelensky said giving up on nukes in 1990s was stupid and illogical. Would you agree to that?
Hindsight is 2020, isn't it? I mean, we can all look at the invasion, the breach of Ukraine's sovereignty in 2014 in Donbass, in Crimea. We can look at the full-scale invasion, everything that has happened since 2022. You know, yes, the Budapest Memorandum clearly did fail, and so we can criticize that. But Ukraine's decision to give up nuclear weapons, if we look in the grand scheme of things, I actually think was the right thing to do. And I think that nuclear weapons are the worst. I watched Oppenheimer, as have we all. It is the big blockbuster that it is. But for many years, actually, I've strenuously objected to these horrendous weapons that can inflict such horrible, awful damage, and I also don't see. I mean, I think we should live in a world free of nuclear weapons, but I also don't see in this war, in the early phase of the war, where there was a threshold that Ukraine might have responded with nuclear weapons, nor has there been a threshold where Russia has deemed, you know, that the use of even a tactical small threshold nuclear weapon on the there was never a moment when really that could have been of any benefit. And I don't see that Ukraine acquiring, or in fact anybody else in the world acquiring nuclear weapons really stands against this kind of test that Ukraine has faced. They're different questions. Was the Budapest Memorandum a failure? Yes, it was.
It was.
It was breached by one of the signatories, which is Russia. It was not sufficiently upheld by the others.
Absolutely.
The question about whether Ukraine should have nuclear weapons is a different question.
Well, it is a different question. But if Ukraine would have nuclear weapons right now in stock, do you believe, Mr. Niland, that it would deter Russian aggression in some portion of it, or maybe in full?
No, because again, like we have not in this war, in any part of this war, reached a level where that kind of weapon usage would have been warranted. And so, no, I don't think the nuclear deterrent would have necessarily stopped this very, very analog war. I mean, it's increasingly less analog. It's increasingly more digital and more drone and more, technologically driven. But it is a very traditional kind of warfare at the same time. And no, I don't think nuclear weapons in our possession back at any point or in the future deters this regular Russian aggression, the regular Russian military threat.
So this regular Russian military threat, if I'm reading you correctly, the Ukrainian new nuclear weapon programs is absolutely unnecessary, and it is not an alternative to NATO. Is that right? Is that what you're telling?
I don't believe there is any alternative to NATO for Ukraine. And again, an independent path of, I mean, let's be quite clear about this. Ukraine could technologically develop a nuclear program. It is within Ukraine's capabilities to do so. It is also within Ukraine's sovereign choice, other than, signatories to non-proliferation agreements and so on and so on. It would be Ukraine's choice to do that. I fundamentally disagree with that. I don't think it's a course that Ukraine should take. I don't think it's even a conversation that we should be having. No, the war as it is, or the war that must be fought, is the war as it is. And too many people have been discouraged from fighting the war as it is because of imagining the war that could be, because of discussions about a potential nuclear threat. You know what? The threat of nuclear catastrophe exists because those weapons exist. The threat of one actually being used is an entirely different calculation, and it is minuscule, and people should just get it out of their heads.
Right.
It's not the solution.
Yeah, I'm reading you again. I agree and disagree, but so I would love to have a conversation. We should maybe grab a coffee and have a 3 hours conversation on that matter. But let us all slide in an easier topic and maybe more even fun, but somewhat fun. Russian frozen assets. Forgive me, assets. Oligarch Abramovich and his promise to sell his Chelsea soccer toy and give money to Ukraine. Well, he didn't do that because he fights Putin, of course, but the House of Good Lords of England, back then, a year ago, if I'm not mistaken, had a committee meeting on that, and let me call that for you. The UK's House of Lords condemns the incomprehensible failure of the government to spend frozen funds from Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich's sale of Chelsea Football Club on aid for Ukraine. So my question to this regard is, why the House of Lords in Europe and the West, collective West, would not lead the way and unfreeze all the Russian assets in the UK in favor of Ukraine in the first place, like $300 billion there. Why it has not happened before?
Okay, they're two very, very different things, and we're in two completely different legal fields as well here, right? So if we're talking about $300 billion in Russian assets, what we're talking about is Russian central bank assets that have been frozen in various countries around the world. They're sitting in the EU. There's a lot of money in Luxembourg, I believe. There's some money in the United States of America. And that's 300 billion in total. What we're talking about with Abramovich is private assets that are held by a private individual. And so, you know, to draw a line between Russian state responsibility for the damage to Ukraine and their obligation, to use the minimum word, to pay for that damage, that's easy. To draw the line from Abramovich's assets to refunding Ukraine or funding Ukraine's reconstruction, that's a different question. However, Abramovich himself did actually pledge to do this.
Yes,
right? So
exactly.
I mean, you know, whether the House of Lords intervenes or not because it's a private property issue, et cetera, but, you know, their job, I suppose, is to analyze laws and see how they are applied and applicable. But the Abramovich question, it goes back further than that. I mean, we'll jump back to the Russian
take it
central
further
bank
than
assets
that
in a minute, if you want to. But the Abramovich question, right? So, I mean, I just said the job of the Lords is to examine laws and how they're applied and applicable. What was the job of Abramovich when he came to London, when he bought Chelsea? His job was to infiltrate British society, British politics with large S. And in England, there is the FA. And the FA actually have guidance on who is a fit and proper person to be the owner of an English Premier League team, and they failed. They failed by just turning a blind eye. I mean, did they think that he was some plucky boy who managed to pull himself up by his bootstraps to become a billionaire in the Russian mafia state? No, that doesn't happen. He never should have been allowed to have had that position in the first place, and then to use that position in the way that he did.
This
to
is exactly
British high life and society and politics.
Yes, Mr. Niland. I mean, I'm with you. I agree. And first of all, these are two absolutely different legal fields, and both are not working.
Both are not working. Both are not working.
Well, that was
that was
my question.
If we go back to the central bank assets, the question that I always ask there is this, right? So, well, there are two main points. Number one is that people argue about precedent. And I'm talking about people who are legal scholars in the West, and you know everything here is rule of law, and we have to do this correctly, right? And so they talk about precedent, the precedent of taking these assets. The precedent that we should be looking at, in actual fact, is the unprovoked and illegal invasion and genocidal intent that are this war, Russia's war against Ukraine. That is the precedent that has been broken. And so breaking other precedents to follow that, it's in line. But the second question that you have to ask about formerly Russia's $300 billion in central bank assets. Under what circumstances do we see them ever being given back to Russia?
Absolutely. I mean,
when the estimated reconstruction bill for Ukraine is $750 billion, double the amount of Russian frozen assets, when we're not talking about reconstruction, when we're going into reparations in the future, when we're going to other forms of justice as well, there is no scenario where the world can ever agree to hand this $300 billion back to the Putin regime.
Well, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, I agree, but I'm not so sure. I'm just afraid this is there is a scenario though it can allow this terrible thing happening. Actually, just give this money to Russians because this is a private property, or not private property, property of Russia and blah, 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 and so on. I can imagine this happening. Maybe not. I hope I'm wrong. But it's just let's discuss Trump, all right? Because this is another topic about the Russian assets. What I meant, the Russian assets are still there. We're using it, but both legal fields are not working, and I don't know why. Because maybe we as a collective West are just not too decisive to react.
The mechanisms that have been worked out so far is how to use the interest that is being accumulated on those assets. And in fact, I met somebody in Berlin last year. I was at a conference in July in Berlin last year, and he was working on doing the exact same thing with Abramovich's frozen assets. Okay, if we can't get the capital, at least can we have access to the interest to be putting that to good use, to at least have that money working? So we're getting the interest off the frozen amount.
Yeah,
but the capital sum should be released.
Yeah, well, interest rate, I know that. And this is somewhat a relief, indeed. Let us return, I don't know, let's get back to Trump, because Trump is back. Trump suspends US aid. Well, for Ukraine, not military help. Yeah, that much we know. What is it actually, what has been suspended, and what does it mean for Ukraine?
I was actually a little bit confused about this myself, and I was asked about this by one of my colleagues last night, and she said, does this Trump ban affect us? And I replied back, and I said, no, of course it doesn't. It won't affect any ongoing projects. It's about approval of new projects. And no, it doesn't affect us in any case. And then I read up more and realized, in actual fact, it's not a stop on approval of new projects. It is a stop work order, meaning that ongoing projects, I'm not sure to what extent they've been funded already, to a degree they have to stop work. And it's not just how it's affecting Ukraine. What Trump has done is affecting operations globally, where the United States is supporting refugees, feeding starving people, providing relief to people who've been struck by disasters and famines and disease. I mean, that is what is being stopped. Here in Ukraine, the one example that I've seen that really struck me is that Veteran Hub, which is an excellent organization.
Right.
I worked alongside Veteran Hub. I was in many meetings with them in the early days of Lifeline Ukraine. I know the phenomenal work that they do, and they've opened satellite offices around the country to support veterans in their home cities. And it looks like that this immediate Trump stop work order means that Veteran Hub, their office in Vinnytsia, is having to close immediately. And so there are veterans who rely on this phenomenal organization with years of a great track record of working with American donors and reporting to them and satisfying them on all of their reporting requirements. And they've jumped through all of the hoops. And now they're having to restrict the services that they can provide. And it's not just Ukraine. This is going on globally. Right. It's another sign of the awfulness that is within this Trump administration. I'm afraid, and we can cherry pick out certain things that might look to potentially be positive here or there about certain statements or certain ideas coming forward. The military aid is not being stopped yet, but it's just what is happening and not just to Ukraine, the United States' operations overseas. What is happening in those countries? What is happening to the United States' reputation overseas as well? It's all very terrible, and I'm sorry, but we're just 1 week into the Trump administration, and it's 4 years of it, and it is what it is. Маємо те, що маємо. We have what we have.
We have what we have. It is what it is. Маємо, що маємо. Thank you so very much for your emotion. It is a great pleasure to talk to you. We're going to do it again, surely. Promise me that.
It's always good to talk to you as well, and I look forward to our next conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paul. We talk. Goodbye.